Okay. It says I'm connected.
Yeah, I can hear you. You sound great.
Perfect.
Okay, how are you holding up?
Oh, I'm doing good. I got 1,000 more things to tell you, but good luck with that.
You know what?
I wish you well.
Here's the good news. I'm going to somehow edit this down. Probably closer to the hour line than the 40 minutes. But I can just put this into like a something and print a transcript, and then I can be like, hey, here's your autobiography as told by you.
Told by me. Great.
I didn't feel the need to do an introduction because I knew throughout I would call her mom. Right. Like that's going to become kind of apparent, right? And like I talk about Rachel enough throughout that it's like, okay, Rachel's probably the name of my wife. And, we mentioned people in the family. With you, I feel like I need to introduce you at least by just saying you're my favorite aunt.
Oh, well, thank you. I won't say you're my favorite nephew. No, can't even say nephew-in-law. Okay. But I'm not allowed to have favorites. That was when my mother drilled into me. She was very...
I hate you all
I don't
equally.
know what... oh my God, she was OCD about not picking favorites. I mean, it was like maniacal, the concentration she put into not picking favorites. To the point that when Jimmy got married, we started calling Janet because Janet was the first birthday in the year. And so however much money she spent on Janet was exactly how much money she was going to spend on each of her children and their spouses.
I mean, it's a good budgeting tactic.
And, it is great. As much as I say that my mother did not pick favorites, we all know who her favorite child was. Carl Dole. That would be her son-in-law. Carl Dole was her favorite child. We all know it. We all know it. So, yes, her favorite child was not hers. Yes.
I think that's how it always works out, right?
Yeah, it does. All right.
So
now that you've introduced me.
Right. So before I met you at that first Thanksgiving I went to, Rachel always told me that I was really going to like Aunt Julia and Uncle Scott because she said Scott is basically you. And then Aunt Julia is really fun and also is a great cook. So where did it all start? Your level of cooking?
Tell you to some extent where it didn't start. So, I know that sounds so cruel, but it's not 100% true. So I do have to kind of talk about my mom briefly because mother was not what I like to refer to as an instinctive cook. It's not that she was a bad cook. She just wasn't a good cook. I mean, she was just a cook of necessity. And she had a few dishes that she knew how to do and do really well. So if you're coming to our house as company, we were going to be eating in the dining room and it wasn't a holiday meal. You were going to get, company chicken, which was just chicken wrapped in sliced beef with bacon, sour cream, and cream of celery soup. That's what you were going to get.
Right.
With white rice, or you were going to get beef fried rice. She had her things that she could do really, really well.
Do you know when she was born? Like what year?
Okay. Dad was born in 1928. She was born in May of 27.
27. Okay. That tracks too, just because the 20s. So her parents, when she was born in the Great Depression, and then her parents probably carried that over. So she was raised in that environment.
Oh my God. Yes. She could make a penny scream in agony before she spent
it. So it makes sense that her cooking, when you say her big meal is basically just, let's take what are a lot of ingredients, because that makes the meal better. It makes it fancier. Right. And, like chicken, beef, bacon like all together, and you're like, that's kind of a strange combination when you think about it in some ways, and then covered in just
cover it in sour cream and
right.
cream of celery soup. But so mom wasn't really like I said, she's not a cook. She didn't enjoy it. It wasn't something, but she was a foodie. Oh my God, was she a foodie? Any new item in the grocery store came home. Every new restaurant had to be tried. She would pick out recipes out of, the Ladies Home Journal or Southern Living magazine. We had the complete collection of the Southern Living cookbooks.
Right.
As a matter of fact, when any of us got married, at least I know for the daughters, I don't know if my brother got them after he got married. I think he did. But all of us got, starting the year we got married, we got the annual Southern Living cookbook every year from my mother. As a matter of fact, she purchased them in advance in like years at a time.
Oh, okay.
So I actually received 2 cookbooks from her after she passed away because she had already paid for them and I was still living at the same address.
Yeah.
And so, that was kind of like, oh, I got another cookbook. How sweet. I was like, oh, well, sad, but
yeah.
And I have since went back in time and collected all the ones from before I got married.
Oh, okay.
So that was kind of I grew up pulling out the Southern Living cookbook because she had the complete collection. So pulling it out, opening it up, and like one memory that's really stuck with me with mom. I have no earthly idea how old I was. I saw an eggplant in the grocery store, this big, black, shiny, and I'm like, what is that? What the fuck? And so mother's like, well, that's an eggplant. And so she picked it. She goes, let's see if we can make something.
Yeah.
And so we came home with the eggplant and she pulled out the cookbook and we did fried eggplant. It probably was not the best fried eggplant ever done on the face of the earth. It was very work intensive, which made me think fried food is not for me. It's just too much work.
Oh, how wrong you were.
So much work. I mean, I love to eat it, but there's so much work. But anyway, so we, so that's kind of like, she loved doing that, so that was my first kind of like exposure to the idea of new things because she was willing to try everything. But I'd have to say it really started to some extent with Helen, the exchange student from South Africa who lived with us when I was 12. She actually had already had some culinary training prior to coming to us.
Okay.
She went to an all-girls school, like a boarding school, and they did some culinary arts, practical education for young ladies was kind of like their tagline.
Right.
And so, she could make meringue. I remember her making meringues and she was very frustrated making meringues in Williston, Florida.
Yeah, in Florida.
Coming from South Africa, very arid South Africa, and trying to make meringues in extremely humid Florida. I know all the British English cuss words now, because that was the most frustrating experience for her. So then the next one that kind of stuck in my head is like what got me started on what is most fascinating about food for me. Like I would say my thesis statement. if I were to a journey of learning, a lifelong learner here, my thesis statement, which I will get to momentarily, because now Helen lived with us for a year. And so I have a very vivid memory of going to the airport and putting on the plane to fly home to South Africa. And I remember her walking through the gate, because that was, I'm older than dirt, so you could actually go down to the gate to do this. And I remember she was walking onto the plane, and we were turning and going through the concourse, walking home back to the car. And I remember thinking, I want to grow up to be just like Helen. And that meant I had to be an exchange student and I had to go for a year. So be cautious of making your life goals very early, such that you achieve them before you're 18. So it's not a good plan. But that got me involved in the AFS program in my hometown. And they had an international club. and we did fundraisers and stuff to help fund the expense of maintaining the program, like interviews, applications, that kind of stuff, but also to help fund for students who couldn't afford the application fee, that kind of thing. So we did an international fair, and I set up my little booth with all the stuff from South Africa that Helen had given us, and using her recipe for apricot cookies, which I think they were like thumbprint cookies is what we would call them, but they were her cookies.
Would that be like a shortbread cookie with the hole with the jelly inside?
And then you put the jam. Yeah. You put the jam on the top of it. Yeah.
Right.
Kind of like that. What I really remember is the booth next to mine, immediately next to mine. We had a shared wall. They had their booth set up, and they were selling pierogies.
Ooh.
And that was my first time ever seeing a pierogi.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have this memory. I may have even said it to them, but I had this moment of, well, it's just a really big freaking ravioli, right? It's kind of like, no. And the fact that it really is a large ravioli. It's got a different filling, and it's pan seared. It's not like boiled. It's a little different, served with butter and sour cream, but it was like, so that gave me my first kind of moment of, but it's not a ravioli, but it is a ravioli, but it's not why? How did the ravioli in Italy become the pierogi in Poland? And so that's the beginning of my kind of like thesis statement.
Now here's my question for you though. Did the pierogi come before the ravioli?
Odds are it probably happened near simultaneously.
Yeah, because Italy's cuisine is world famous for not being Italian.
Right. So
nothing is from Italy.
So kind of, if we want to jump chronologically, the story of the pierogi, although I use actually the empanada, the story is you start with a bao, a dumpling somewhere in Asia. Mm-hmm. And this little grandmother makes her dumpling in Asia. And then next door, there's another grandmother who makes a dumpling. But she just makes one change. She does one thing different. Mm-hmm. She adds a different spice, or she cooks it slightly different. And you can just kind of follow as you go from grandmother to grandmother. You can follow that dumpling as it goes up into, not Argentina. Wow, wrong continent. As it goes up into Afghanistan, it becomes a mantu.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes mantu, a steamed dumpling. And then as it continues across, goes down into India, it becomes a samosa.
Mm-hmm.
It comes up, and as it can all the way through Egypt, right over to Italy, becomes a ravioli. Mm-hmm. You can follow it up to Poland, where it becomes a pierogi. You could follow it all the way up to Sweden, where maybe it became a potato dumpling. Right. But ultimately, you're going to end up in South America with an empanada,
mm-hmm.
with just one grandmother changing one thing. And so that was kind of that's kind of how I approach food, is that I'm always interested in the why part of behind it. Yeah. Why does every culture have a meatball? Even if it's not made of meat.
Yeah.
Even if it's a vegetarian, a vegetable ball, or if it's a seafood, every culture has a meatball.
Mm-hmm.
Every culture has a pocketed food.
Yeah.
A wrapped food.
That also, you just saying that even makes me think of like the difference in cooking style between you and Rachel, Rachel's also fantastic cook. But when she makes changes, like she can think kind of on the fly. She can take what ingredients we have and put them together and cook something. Mm-hmm. It kind of follows generally the theme of what the original dish was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Where when I think of you and your kind of impromptu cooking, it can just be I'm just going to pull this from some random continent.
Somewhere. I don't know where it's coming from.
It won't even be the same continent that the original dish is from.
And I think, and a lot of that has to do with kind of other influences in my life, having seen, and that was the big thing about Sweden for me, multiple things about Sweden for me, but you see this often, familiar foods used in unexpected ways.
Yes.
And I've had a lot of exposure to that.
Yes, you have.
I remember.
I think that's actually, we should do that now instead of later. Where all have you lived in life? Okay,
so we started with Wilson, Florida. Grew up there, and so then
that's northern part of Florida, right? The Panhandle.
Yeah, that's north. I call it North Central Florida.
Okay,
that's rural farming country where it's small towns, one stoplight kind of places.
Yeah.
So that's where I grew up. So there wasn't a lot of cultural diversity. And the funny part is I moved to a town that was even smaller. I joke, that as we were driving on the road into Ryd, someone was out painting the one on 61 when I moved there because I had just arrived. Now, that was the winter. Those were the year-round residents.
Mm-hmm.
Because Öland, where I lived, it's a tourist destination for the summer.
Okay.
So in the summer, it booms up to about 300 or more people.
Why do people go there in the summer? Like what was drawing people to it?
It's southern.
Oh, okay. It's just far south in this. Okay.
It's almost as far south as you can get, but it's the big midsummer location.
Gotcha.
It's where people go for midsummer.
Yeah.
Instead of going down to Skåne, which is south, which is right above Denmark.
Okay.
It's the little box at the bottom if you look at a map.
Yeah.
So, so that was the first one. I went to Sweden. A lot came out of that trip. I mean, that living there, so much about food changed for me there.
Mm-hmm.
Then I got married moved to Pensacola, moved to Orlando.
Yeah. Bounced around Florida.
Met a sailor. Moved to Hawaii. My husband was still at sea. I was still living in an apartment with 2 bar stools and a frying pan to my name. That's all we had. No furniture, just 2 bar stools and a frying pan. My luggage had gotten stolen. Best thing that ever happened to us. So we, another story for another day.
Yeah.
So we, I get adopted by this very sweet, Air Force spouse I met on the bus. Just random. I asked her if this is the right bus to get to somewhere else and asked her to define viaduct for me because I didn't know what that word meant.
Right.
Because I had been told to get off the bus at the viaduct and I don't know what a viaduct is at that time. Do now. And so she was like, "Are you new to?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Navy wife?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So we started talking and, she basically made sure she got my phone number. She was a beautiful woman and I credit her for the fact that Scott and I are still married because that was a hellacious first 3 months.
Yeah.
I was by myself in Hawaii, no car, no furniture, no luggage, nothing. And I knew this many people.
Yeah.
So it was a bit, and Mother was already, "You should come home.
Right.
I'll pay for the ticket. And when he gets back," and I look back on it and think, if I had not been where my husband kind of left me when he, every time he came home from sea after that, every time he went to sea, he'd be worried, would I be okay?
Yeah.
And that would have changed our dynamic a lot. So I think much better that I met Mick and got to stay there.
Yeah.
So she invited me to a church covered dinner.
Okay.
Like a picnic in Waikiki. So we show up in Waikiki on the beach and they have just masses of tables, this huge table just loaded with food. And we put our contribution down and I don't even remember what I brought. I think I did. I don't remember. I think I brought bacon because I could fry bacon. I had that capability.
Pan. Yeah.
I had pan, so I could fry bacon. So, we set it down and we were there about 20 minutes and I'm kind of like, okay, I'm a bit hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't we eating?
Yeah.
To which someone said, "Oh, the rice isn't ready." And I'm thinking, the rice isn't ready.
Mm-hmm.
Very confused by this. And that's when I learned that in Hawaii, you have rice at every meal. You cannot eat until the rice is ready. And that's when I noticed the table just off to the side with 2 rice cookers on it.
Yeah.
And I swear to God, they were as big as a Goodyear tire. I had never seen, they were massive.
Yeah.
This tall.
Because it's just feeding everybody. Yeah.
Yes. Massive. And I'm thinking, who put for breakfast? Then, a little bit later, I'm in McDonald's and I notice the breakfast menu has Spam and rice and hash, and rice. And you can get every McDonald's breakfast meal you could get with rice.
Really?
In Hawaii. Every single last one of them. And I was just like, that's different. So that was the beginning of my, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Our favorite Chinese restaurant, our first tour there, unfortunately, is long since closed. Just kind of give you an idea of how different. It has a lot of Asian influences, but it's different.
Mm-hmm.
The restaurant was a Chinese restaurant. Billing, name, everything about it said, I think it was China Garden was actually the name of it, or something like that. The owners were Japanese.
Right.
Okay, so that was the first.
When you even said Chinese restaurant, it threw me off a little bit because that's not a big migration destination for Chinese. Like you said, right, California, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Western United States, but the islands is very Japanese.
Not so much. Very Japanese. And Filipino is actually the more prominent if you're going to have an outside culture coming in. That wasn't the weirdest part. That was the part that made Scott and I both go, huh. You know how you sit down at a table, like if you go to an Italian restaurant, they'll bring you breadsticks.
Yeah.
You go to a Mexican restaurant, you get chips and salsa.
Mm-hmm.
So we sat down at this one and they brought us, are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Kimchi.
Which is Korean.
Right. So to say we were confused by this restaurant, even, living in Sweden, that was one of the other kind of big takeaways from Sweden was when you went to these ethnic restaurants in Sweden, more often than not, they were more authentic.
Yeah. I would probably say they were probably mostly European too, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like
yeah. So it was very different. I think there was a Chinese restaurant, and it was, yes, the staff barely spoke Swedish.
Yeah.
At all. They barely spoke English either. But, it was definitely, you don't have the same Americanization.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, is more about the fact that we are a melting pot, that kind of, so when you have a Chinese restaurant that's been Americanized, that it was Americanized like 100 years ago. It's been, the families, we've been Americanizing it for decades.
Yeah.
Not, it's not, they just got here and opened up a restaurant. So it's, so that is a little different. Sweden doesn't have the same diversity of culture that we do here in the States. Yeah. So that was my first kind of like, huh. So needless to say, Hawaii was like another one of those, okay, this is different, and having Spam, that was my first exposure to Spam as a just constant food source. Fried rice, and everything. Spam was everywhere. Rice was everywhere. So then the next place we lived was South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Was it Charleston?
Yes, it was Charleston.
I just know they have the Naval Academy there, so the sun.
Yeah, but so we and so the interesting about that house is the neighbor. She was Mormon, and at the time,
now you're speaking my language.
Yeah, there was a huge Mormon population in the submarine force at the time. So she taught me, I forget how I ended up talking to her or why I was in her garage, but I'm in her garage and I'm seeing these huge wooden like device holding cans, these first in, first out can feeders, and these huge bins of wheat berries and just all this food in her garage. And I'm just like, what is this? Wow. And she goes, well, we keep an emergency pantry. We need to keep, hers was a 6-month pantry. She goes, I maintain a 6-month pantry. And so if anything happens, if he loses his job or, cause, Charleston, if a hurricane comes through, I can feed my family for 6 months. And I was like, okay, that's a bit much for me. But the other thing she taught me was lots of little tricks and tips to kind of extend a meal. So one of her tricks, she was like, I hosted a wardroom party for 40 people.
Mm-hmm.
It was a taco bar. And all she paid for was the food. She did all the food. The junior officers, the officers paid for all the drinks.
Yeah.
And she goes, because we're Mormon, we don't buy soda. We don't buy alcohol. So she goes, so they left those on coolers on the back porch.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were going to drink alcohol or caffeine, that was on the outside the house. So you didn't actually do it inside their house.
Right.
She goes, but it was still at the party. So
Very
she goes,
familiar.
it worked out great. Worked perfectly for everyone. So, but she did that, fed 40 people on $10 total.
Wow.
Yeah. So she took the ground meat and she called it cracked wheat. So she took wheat berries and pulsed it like gently.
Mm-hmm.
You could also use bulgur. Soaked it in beef stock.
Mm-hmm.
And then put it in with the ground meat with her onions and peppers. A lot of stuff that she got, she got the cracked wheat. She goes, the cracked wheat comes from the Bishop Farms or from is it called a Bishop Farm? The church farm. They have a word that goes in front of church farm, and I don't know what that word is anymore.
Bishop Farm
it's been a couple of
sounds
decades.
Correct.
It's been a few decades.
Yeah, I never lived in a Mormon community. I was just raised within a Mormon family. So, okay. So Bishop Farm is like bringing up memories of things.
That's like, yeah. So your memory of that is about is vaguer than mine, is what you're saying. So anyway, so they had a co-op, and so she goes, I do childcare, so I get free wheat berries and other things from the farm. But yeah, so she made like taco meat for 40 people using like a pound or two, just a few pounds of meat.
Rachel and I used to do that with, actually with oats. You take oats and do the same thing, cook it in the beef stock. She's like, I want to say we used something else too. No, it wasn't quinoa, but it's another one of those type, those grains that absorbs the flavor. And it also helps keep the texture a little bit of meat when you mix it together.
That's why she didn't like oats.
Yeah.
She didn't like oats because
oats
it didn't
definitely
have the same
lost the
tooth.
Yeah. You could tell a little bit more, but the taste was fine. But it helped when we were, budgeting more our meals and stuff. Yeah. You buy 1 pound of meat and it fed us for 2 weeks when we just mixed it with that. We just mix it and freeze it.
Mix it up and go from there. So that was kind of my first. That was my first, okay, that maybe it is a good idea to kind of rotate through the pantry and how, first in, first out, and how to store stuff like that. So that led me. So I maintain a 3-month. I try. I'm not perfect. I try to maintain a 3-month pantry.
You're guaranteed 2 1/4.
Right. Guaranteed 2 1/4. I may not want to eat that rye flour, whatever, but I got it, so, which served us well. We didn't have to worry about hurricanes other than that one time in Hawaii, but South Carolina, and then again in Florida when we were stationed in Kings Bay later. So back to where we've been. So I know.
So after Charleston, where did we go?
After Charleston, we did our 6 months in Groton, Connecticut. Not my favorite place on the planet.
Okay, that's fair.
So then we left there. We thought we were headed to Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
I actually drove down to Newport News, Virginia to house hunt. Found a place, and I drive straight through back up to Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
So I walk in the door to hear my husband screaming at someone on the telephone. Now you have bet, Scott. He is not a loud person. He does not scream. So that kind of gives you a level of how upset he was. He was headed to be a department head on a ship that was in new construction in Newport News, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
So in that type of situation, it's a 1-for-1 replacement. He is going in to replace a specific person.
Okay.
He was on the phone with the guy he was supposed to relieve, who called him on Friday to say, don't sign a lease in Virginia. The change of home port letter is dated May 1st. So he called us end of business Friday to tell us not to sign a lease in Virginia because as of Monday, we would not be moving to Virginia. As of Monday, we would be moving to Hawaii.
Oh, wow. Which is vastly different.
Yeah, vastly different. So needless to say, Scott was a bit peeved.
Yeah.
He graduated on Friday and reported to work on Monday in Hawaii.
Wow.
And that was the fastest, right. And at that time, the only quarantine program for cats available was the 4-month. So we flew we couldn't fly from Groton, so we had to go to Providence. We flew from Providence to Atlanta to Hawaii with 2 cats in cabin.
Ooh.
And so the flight to Hawaii was fascinating. They had to do the full 4 months of quarantine. And of course, we get a place to live and just over 30 days later, Scott leaves on a 6-month appointment.
Right.
So our furniture hadn't even arrived by the time before he left.
Wow.
I lived in a great neighborhood, which kind of goes back to food. I lived in a predominantly Filipino neighborhood in Kalihi. So much so that in one day, I had the guy delivering the refrigerator, the guys delivering the loaner furniture, and the guys delivering my unaccompanied baggage shipment, which is basically stuff with their furniture.
Yeah.
And I opened the door, and every single person, I open the door, they cock their head to one side and go, "Your husband Filipino?" I'm like, "No." Huh. A friend of mine is a real estate agent, and she needed to come by and drop off food for a bake sale.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't find my house because I lived, my cable bill was addressed to 2640 Kalihi Avenue, downstairs door by the sink. Just to kind of give clarification there. So when she couldn't find the house, she stopped at this little mini mart just 4 doors down from me.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, "Hey, I'm looking for my friend Julie." He's like, "There's more than one Julie on the street. You'll need to tell me more." And she goes, "Oh, she's about to behind Howley." And she goes, "Oh, the Howley girl." "Oh, her name's Julie." Okay. And then he gave her directions to my house. Everybody knew who I was, even though I didn't know who they were. And some of my neighbors thought I was just the most pathetic thing they'd ever seen because I was, as far as they knew, I was a single woman living in this apartment down by the sink.
Right.
And so once a week, it was different. There were 3 of them. The little Filipino grandmothers, just teeny tiny little women, would come in with this just massive tray of food. And I would be like, "It's just me."
Yeah.
But yeah, they would come and bring me food. And so Scott comes back from sea.
There are worse lives to live than Filipino grandmothers bringing you food.
Having Filipino grandmothers bring me food did not suck, let me tell you. But so that's where I kind of got my exposure to Filipino food, was all of that great food coming into my house. And then we had orders to San Diego. I flew back to Florida and was staying with my sister Margaret and her kids while they were in flux, getting their house remodeled. And my husband is in this like 9-month long training pipeline. So he was in DC, he's in Hawaii, he's Great Lakes, he's just bouncing all around. So he's in the Hawaii leg of it. It's about to end, and calls me. What you doing? Trying to teach the nephews fractions, and I don't remember, percentages, and I don't remember how to do that. So, oh, okay. Click. Less than 2 minutes later, phone rings again. It's done. Hello. What you doing? The same thing I was doing a minute and a half ago. Still teaching fractions. Percentages? What's going on? He goes, well, I have something I have to tell you, and I think you're going to be using words that your sister doesn't want them to learn. Is there somewhere you can, somewhere you can go for some privacy? So I stand up and step outside of the apartment because they're staying in these little condos on the beach. Yeah. So I step out into the hallway of the condo, and I'm immediately, where are we going? Because I know. Actually, no. My first question was, are you okay? So he wasn't calling me that he was in the hospital, that he had been diagnosed with something, or something like that.
Let's get that out of the way. It wasn't,
he didn't break something or anything like that. So I got that settled. I'm like, okay, so that means if he's calling me and has something he has to tell me, that means we're getting an orders modification. Where are we going? Well, there's this ship. Where are we going? Because I didn't want the long, involved story that he was going to tell me.
Because none of that applies to you.
Right. I just want to know where we are going. And his response was Guam. He did not expect my response. Because the second he said Guam, I was like, yes! Excuse me, what? So 3 days before closing on a house in San Diego, we get orders rerouting us to Guam.
Yeah.
So now I could care. I mean, I've already calculated what needs to happen for the house. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
There are other reasons why I was really happy.
You've done this before.
Yeah, we wanted to go to Guam in the first place. And I know he really wanted to go to Guam. It's all he'd been talking about for the last 2.5 years. 4 years, last 4 years. And so, so we ended up losing money. We lost our earnest money, but we had to basically cancel that sale. And then on the rush, try to get the cats ready to go through quarantine, because Guam also has quarantine. Get me through overseas suitability screening. Get because our car was on the mainland. Our furniture was on everything. Nothing was in Hawaii. Everything was on the mainland. And get all of that sent to Guam. We did it, but it was a little rushed.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So now we're in Guam.
And
so we bought a house in Guam. And Guam was another one of those kind of expanding universe places. But the thing that was most interesting about Guam was, because it's an island and it is it's not on any shipping lines. If anything goes to, it's going to Guam. Yeah. It's not just passing by.
Right.
So if the cilantro boat doesn't show up today, there's going to be no cilantro on the island.
Yeah.
For a while. Yeah. My husband learned how to make yogurt because there was about 8 weeks with no plain yogurt to be had anywhere on the island.
Yeah. Fortunately, that's something that you can make in a place, especially when it's hot.
Yes. We actually would stick it in a cooler and stick it on the back porch with towels, and he would just pour boiling water every few hours. He'd go out and pour some more boiling water on the towels to keep it hot because it was from the bright sun. The main thing I picked up for Guam, though, was I went to this really great, my happy place is this Indian market. It's an Indian grocer on Guam. It's a little weird. It's Pomika Sales. It is in the back room of a clothing boutique.
Okay.
So I'm not kidding. You walk through the clothing boutique and then through this door, and then you're in this back room. So I took a friend back there, and they were kind of like, "You sure this is safe? Is this legal? Is this sketchy?" And it did have this backroom, drug deal kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
But it was a really nice space. They had all this food they brought in from overseas. I went in looking for garam masala, and the owner was like, "No, sorry."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "How can you not have garam masala?" He goes, "Well, most Indian cooks make it before they use it." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's a very good point." So it started with me wanting to learn how to make garam masala, and then it just kind of expanded.
Yeah.
And so my spice rack is pretty scary now. And I pretty much make all of my own seasoning blends because then, case in point, went to the commissary, planning to have a party. We were going to serve fajitas and chorizo burgers. No fajita seasoning, no taco seasoning, nothing that even resembled. I could get chili seasoning. That's it.
Yeah.
Chili mix. And I'm like, no. And so I had to go home, open up my spice rack and go, what goes in fajitas? And make my own fajita blend, make my own I had to do that so many times that I now make my own.
Yeah.
Another problem was, having to be able to, you say, kind of go pull it out of ether.
Yeah.
That's another kind of Guam thing.
Yeah. Which makes sense because if you go to the store, you're planning to make something and like they don't have it and they're not going to have it for who knows how long.
Who knows how long.
Right. Mm-hmm. You've got to kind of just work with what ingredients they have there
and kind of working on the fly.
Did y'all ever do any of like growing your own stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you heard about the spider population in the...
Let's just move. Where'd you move after Guam?
That's right. I forgot. We could do eggplant pretty easily, radishes, and Japanese radish, daikon. We could do that really well. Cucumbers.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bug, slug.
Yeah, I get you.
Something growing on the root, kind of, it was a challenge. And of course it rains. Oh my God, does it rain?
Yeah.
It's in excess of 100 inches annually at my house. Typhoons routinely come through in December and January.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, one of the biggest ones that came through was in December.
Yeah.
So, it's just hot and wet.
Mm-hmm.
It's just wet. But we loved it. We loved it. We loved it. We loved it. And, there's so many interesting, like I said, the influences, because we are so much closer. We're 3 hours from Japan,
mm-hmm.
and it is the poor man's Hawaii.
Yeah.
So we have, pre-COVID, they were up to, I think, almost 2 million Japanese tourists a year.
No.
So Tumen Bay is all Japanese tourists.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a lot of that kind of influencing the culture there. And then Filipino population is very, very strong, as well as the Chamorro population, which is the native
mm-hmm.
population of Guam, and the rest of the Marianas.
Was there like a Chamorro cuisine?
Yeah, but you'll find it's very Spanish influenced. It's
I mean, it would make sense. It was. The Filipino cuisine is also very Spanish
nature. So red rice is a very traditional. It's white rice, but it is red, and basically it is the saffron rice
mm-hmm.
of Spain. So the sailors from Spain, they come to South America. They want the saffron
mm-hmm.
rice from their home, but they can't get saffron.
Mm-hmm.
So they find the achote seed.
Yeah.
So they use the achote seed, or I think it's also called annatto, A-N-N-A, I don't know, I can't remember. It has more than one name. And so they have the achote seed that dyes and flavors the rice.
Yeah.
Bright red, kind of like a bright rust.
Yeah.
And so then those same sailors then go into the Pacific. They settle in They're in the Philippines, they're in Guam. And so it's the same thing that makes Philippine sausage chorizo so red is this achote seed. And so you have the red rice, which is the kind of Guam version of the Spanish rice.
Yeah.
Finadini, which is a condiment. It is a soy sauce with chilies, onions, and a few other things.
Okay.
Kelaguen, which is typically served raw. So that is shrimp, beef, shrimp kelaguen, fish kelaguen, or seafood, name the fish. If it can be eaten raw, they make it into kelaguen. Squid, you name it. But they also have, using cooked, chicken kelaguen, which I love, which is basically all of them. It's very similar to ceviche.
Okay.
It is diced with lemon. They use lemon powder because
fresh lemons.
The boat brings the powder.
Yeah.
And you can keep the powder for years, So the lemon powder, booney peppers, which are very similar to the Thai pepper, very small, very spicy.
Yeah.
And then green onion and shaved coconut. And that's all mixed together.
Yeah.
And served usually in a titilla, not a tortilla, a titilla, which is a little thicker and sweet. I despise them because tortillas should not be thick or sweet. I do want to talk about the one dish that I think is unique to Guam.
Okay.
It's called tinaktok.
Tinaktok.
And so the tinaktok.
Okay.
The theory is that the name comes from the sound of a knife hitting the cutting board.
Oh, I like that. Is it, is other parts, is that like that sound specific to this dish, or is that just kind of part of the language? Like, do they have those types of sounds? Very onomatopoeia.
It is specific to this dish.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I have never heard the term used before.
Right.
The reason that there is no such thing as a pure Chamorro. The language isn't pure, nor is the line, because the Spaniards killed off all males on Guam, back in the day. So it is has a lot of Spanish
integration
influences.
Yeah.
And so most of the food language is that way. So that's why this one's kind of different, is that it, that's the only thing we can think of, because it doesn't mean anything anywhere else, So anyway, so what the dish is, it is, you take usually beef, you chopped beef, finely chopped. I cheat. I use ground beef because lazy. But it's so simple. It is ground meat, spices, green beans, garlic, tomatoes, and diced tomatoes, and coconut milk.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this, and then you serve it over rice.
Naturally.
I love it. I love tinaktok. So, but you talk to people from other islands in the Marianas that,
Yeah.
Yeah. All the islands in the Marianas have red rice. They have kelaguen. You'll find that in different places. But I'm pretty sure tinaktok is only on Guam.
Yeah. Can you send a recipe of that to Rachel and I to try? Because it sounds delicious. Like, we love, all of our favorite foods from different cuisines usually are bed of rice, a meat and vegetable mix in some sort of sauce over rice, and it's always delicious. But the coconut milk creating the sauce
and of
is
course,
very intriguing.
Just like with your Thai food, it's better if you're using coconut cream, in my opinion, personally.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and then you can make it hot or not hot depending on your preference.
Yeah.
But yeah, I made some changes to mine. I add water chestnuts to mine because I like that a little more crunch. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'll send you that
recipe. Please do.
It's super easy. And it's kind of and that's the thing about most Guam food. It is to some extent kind of peasant or campfire. It's very easy, very simple.
Mm-hmm.
but the difference is what ingredients you're using.
Yeah. I mean, and even the way that dish you explained it when you're talking about the ingredients you're using, it's basically you take the meat, which you have, and then you just kind of mix in the vegetables that are always present.
Yeah.
The things that you can grow there, probably. Like
the
things you don't have to wait for.
Right. So beans are big. Mm-hmm. And of course, like Hawaii, Spam is everywhere.
Yeah.
Spam is everywhere. There's even Spam Caligan.
And look, people knock Spam in the States because we have better meat, but fried Spam is delicious.
It is delicious.
We have way better options here. There are things that are better, but you shouldn't knock it. It's tasty.
You don't knock it. It's tasty. So now we need to leave Guam because although we did 2 tours there, my heart is, Scott, we left Guam in February of 2009 and landed in Providence, Rhode Island at midnight to a snowstorm. Now you have to keep in mind, with the exception of that 6 months I spent in Connecticut, I had lived 11 years in Hawaii.
Yeah.
2.5 years in Guam, 2.5 years in Florida, 2 years in South Carolina.
Yeah.
So I had spent the last 2 decades not snowing.
Yeah.
More than half of it in Hawaii. So I did not own socks. There were no socks.
Oh,
there was no heavy winter coats.
Right.
None of that. I was not equipped for this. And, it was so cold. But culinarily speaking, we were only going to be there a year, from March to March. And, so that's when I really seriously started learning how to make it at home. Because we went to a Thai restaurant in Newport, and it was just wrong. There's no other way to describe it. It was sad. It was so sad.
Yeah.
It was just wrong. So wrong. And so then a few weeks later, we went to the Indian restaurant, which was right in the same spot. It was wrong. So then we went to one of the best Mexican restaurants.
In quotations, big quotations. Anytime I hear the words best Mexican restaurant and you're north.
So to which Scott was just like, how can you how can you mess up Mexican? I mean,
people do. Work. Trust me. People do.
We now know that. We know that very, very well. Now, see, we were used to Hawaii. For the longest time, Hawaii didn't have any good Mexican restaurants. I mean,
I wouldn't expect them
Taco Bell. Yeah, Taco Bell was as good as it got. And we did find one eventually, but I had already kind of started doing that to some extent with my chili rojo, my chili verde. But man, that was tough. There was unless you were eating seafood, there was really nothing culinarily speaking. And I do not eat seafood. Yeah. I'll eat shrimp, but it's still not like, oh my God. I mean, I'm all about the pig personally, but that was a very sad place to live. But having learned from Guam with my happy place in Pamika Sales, where I could find the weird stuff I wanted.
Yeah.
I began an exhaustive search for a good international market. And so it took some driving.
Market.
And then there was also this Asian market, predominantly Asian market. I mean, it had other cuisines in there as well, but it was predominantly, I think it was Japanese family. that was a little bit farther afield. So that would be kind of like a weekend drive for us. We would go and hit all the markets, and we found an Indian market that we really, really loved, where we could get our favorite chutneys and stuff like that. And so it's like, okay, today we're going to the, which market it was.
Yeah.
So that helped. And then left Newport and moved to where we currently are. He got stationed at the Pentagon, so we moved to DC, and that was our first DC tour. And, now, food-wise for DC, that was where I discovered Sulatab and their cooking courses. And the fun thing about our cooking, the Sulatabs here, was we had access to a lot of interesting chefs.
I would imagine so in DC.
So one of my favorites, Amy Rioli, I can't remember how she pronounced her name. She actually worked for the White House. Her expertise is Middle Eastern and Mediterranean cuisine, and culture. And she's actually she's the first one who put a name to my fascination with culinary anthropology,
right,
and the history of food and how all of that started. So I love that.
I like the culinary anthropology though, because it's
just fascinating.
You can just see it everywhere. Like literally everywhere, because everyone eats stuff, and you can see
everyone eats.
the almost the story of any place is told by their food.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting.
So a couple of things that I had written down as we were going that I just kind of wanted to bring up before I ask you like a last question, because I know that will tangent off. All three of these might, but I know for certain
I
the
will
last
try
one is,
to laser.
You're good. You're good. So in Sweden, there's a concept of a time of day and a sit-down meal, and the moment you have taught it to us has changed. We have a sign now in our dining room. You saw fika. Oh my God, the concept of fika has changed my life. I love fika. We sometimes will say, like, we don't know what we're going to do for dinner. We're like, you want just fika tonight? We're like, absolutely, I want a fika. So can you explain fika?
Okay, so for me, my experience of fika, and I'm being mauled by my cat.
You're good.
My experience of fika is, now you have to remember my host family, young children.
Yeah.
So,
how old were you when you were in Sweden?
I was 17, turned 18 while I was there.
Okay.
And, they would have usually a very light kind of lunch-ish thing, around very early. And then we would have dinner fairly early, like, 5, 6 o'clock. But we would be sitting upstairs watching TV, and it was usually some British program that was like, 5 years old.
Yeah.
That had made it on, because they only had 2 channels, and, it was Swedish TV at the time. And so Marie would come upstairs with, a pot of tea and a fika.
Yeah.
And it could be, now that was one of the things, she is credited by my family for teaching me to cook. I think Marie would have been very much like my mother, as she was a cook of necessity. But she made everything from scratch.
Gotcha.
Again, by necessity.
Yeah.
Because, we lived, the grocery store wasn't around the corner. There was no grocery store in Ravioli. I mean, 60 people.
Yeah.
And she was an excellent baker, though. I had to argue with Ramona on that one. She is an excellent baker, and I think she enjoys it. So she would make these buns and rolls and cookies and cakes and just all these things. And she would bring them upstairs, and we would just sit. And sometimes we would have rolls. Sometimes it was just a piece of bread and some cheese. And if we had any sandwich meat, it would, smörgås, which is a open face. We would call that a charcuterie board now. Yeah. But, it's a smörgås.
Yeah.
And you would just kind of plane off your cheese and put a little butter on the bread. And so sometimes it was knäckebröd, and sometimes it was tonguebröd. Sometimes it was sliced bread she had purchased, something she had made. So it's just this time to stop and just enjoy a very light repast. Now, when we were traveling through Prague, after having spent several weeks in Sweden, well, a week and a half, 2 weeks, in Sweden for Ramona's wedding, having been fika.
Yeah.
Fikar? Ja, fikare? Viha fikat? I can't remember. I can't. Fika is a verb, so I'm not quite sure how to.
Yeah, extrapolate it out.
Yeah, I'm trying to. We had done the fika several times. So when we were touring that area, Scott would look at me and he'd go, "Shall we fika?" Yeah. And we would stop. Now Scott and I, of course, because this is what we do, we bastardized it.
Of course.
Because fika is actually traditionally coffee.
Yeah.
It's more traditional of a coffee break kind of idea.
Well, it's good to know that Rachel and I do it correctly then.
All right. So Scott does it with beer. So we would stop and just have a fika and, take in the sights, enjoy where we were, and then back off to the next exciting endeavor. So
it's amazing what in the middle of the day, just sitting down, having a drink, and then a small little just nibble. Just a nibble of something. Maybe some fruit, a little bit of bread, whatever you got just laying around. Sometimes we even just do it just with, a little bit of leftovers. Like there's not enough leftovers for a meal. There's just that small portion. You're like, I'll just eat that. Have a nice cup of coffee or whatever. And then suddenly you're rejuvenated for hours. It's just that small little bit.
And that's exactly, especially with me, because, I'm like, oh man, we're walking,
mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, I'm looking for a place to sit down every second, and so, yeah. And that was the other thing that coming from Sweden, the using food in unexpected ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of my first kind of like, what moments was Wednesday, I started school late because the first period for my classmates, they had Swedish, basically social studies.
Okay.
And Swedish language class.
Mm-hmm.
Their literature
basically
class.
What we have is English language arts.
Right, precisely. But so I always had lunch. I don't think we called it lunch, but I don't know what we called it. I always had lunch with the girls,
mm-hmm.
the twins, because they weren't in school. And so I remember sitting down and we were having hot dogs. And I was like, okay, warm sausage is what they call it.
Yeah.
And the plate comes out. There are hot dogs on the plate. And there's a bowl of macaroni. Plain. Just macaroni.
Mm-hmm.
Cooked macaroni. And I'm like, no bun.
Yeah.
No bun. And I'm like, okay. So I'm watching. And they scoop up the macaroni and they put it on the plate. They grab the ketchup. And the ketchup over the whole plate.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. So first I'm like, okay, I'll get butter and put it on the macaroni. Because the idea of ketchup on macaroni just...
I mean, it is tomato sauce.
Me out yeah, I guess. Yeah. So it wigged me out a little bit. And so then eventually I would grab the mustard.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I would put ketchup on my macaroni and eat it, and that's normal to me.
Yeah.
Ketchup macaroni. The other kind of one, again, on the hot dog, at the train station, which is one of the places where I could catch my bus, there was a hot dog vendor across the street. And I noticed on his little placard, the different ways they served hot dogs. And I do believe he did have buns.
Mm-hmm.
No one ever got the bun. No one. Because most people walked away with a little boat that had 2 scoops of mashed potatoes and hot dogs. Absolutely delicious. And so then we go up to Stockholm And there is, again, a street vendor selling. Now, Anthony Bourdain talked about this one. Tungbrödrulle. Flat bread roll-up is what I would call it. So basically, you take some flat bread, you roll it kind of like you would a cone with a tortilla.
Yeah.
And you put some hot dogs in it, and then you just start
hot dog hand roll.
Potatoes, whatever you want inside there goes inside there, and you just eat it.
I want you to know, you're saying this like it's a normal sentence, but to follow up, you put in hot dogs and then fill it up with whatever you want in there, such as mashed potatoes, is not a normal sentence to most people.
You're just like hot dog to mashed potatoes.
What topping you want on your hot dog? You got any mashed potatoes? No, I said topping. I know what you said.
Yeah, I know what you said. I know exactly. So it was an experience. I was just like, huh. But don't knock until you try it. I really love my plain hot dog with mashed potatoes. Or macaroni.
Potatoes on hot dogs isn't as weird to me because in Ecuador, when you go, they have in Quito, there's a big chain of hot dog joints that's there. Everybody goes there. They love it. Fantastic. And the standard topping is like ketchup, onion, pickled onions specifically, potato chips. And it's amazing. But that's more of like, for me, it was more of the texture and the salty rather than the potato taste itself. But I could theoretically, because I've eaten so many hot dogs with potato chips on them, mashed potatoes. I'm like, okay, I could possibly see that. But I think at the same time, it's still a ridiculous sentence of, you just throw some hot dogs in there. What else you want? Mashed potatoes, scoop
potatoes.
It's just
whatever.
It's strange, but you know what?
It's crazy.
Look,
it's and I don't think I ever had. I know at home we never had a bun. I'm almost certain the entire year I was there, we never put a hot dog in a bun. That was just not.
Did you ever put in other types of bread? Like not specifically a bun, but just take bread and wrap it up and.
No. Now that's something I would have done at home in Florida. White bread rolled in half when you don't have a bun.
I'll say growing up, I'm pretty sure I ate way more hot dogs just on bread in a tortilla than I did in a bun. But,
I didn't know.
Rachel's been on a shopping trip all day and just came back with all the goods.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi.
Well, we'll wrap up here real quick and then.
I promise. We've only been talking for 4+ hours.
It was always a risk I was going to run in asking to have a conversation with you that this was going to run long.
Oh, I knew. So good luck on that editing process. And I would not be opposed to the concept that if you're like strapped for folks, you can just say "Cooking with Julia" part 1, and just and then kind of feed out some pieces that make sense, and then pull. I mean, you might be able to get 3 or 4 podcasts out of this.
Thank you for doing this. Is there anything you're working on you want me to put in the notes to promote?
But the only thing that Compass, that is www.nsfamilyline.org. I am a Compass mentor, and we are empowering Navy spouses. We are currently 100% virtual. And I'm on the global team, which means when we do go back to in-person, we will retain. That's one thing that's been great from the pandemic. That's like the one silver lining I have, is that we've discovered that the reach we have through the global. So I've had participants from Maine, Japan. I've taught in Guam. I've taught in Europe. I've taught all over the world. And so there are a lot of Navy spouses all over the freaking world who need this course. So I will be continuing on the global team. So that's my Navy spouses teaching other Navy spouses about Navy life.
Beautiful.
All right. So you go have dinner.
I will. You have a wonderful evening. Thank you again for doing this.
Thank you. And you're probably going to need a month and a half to edit this, but
I'll make it work somehow.